In keeping with the videos I posted over the last few days, I, and kind of just the general spirit of this project in terms of remembering the legacy of the old socialist movement, what it once stood for, in contrast to what socialism has come to mean today as a result of the failure of the old movement. One of the central themes of that memory being the prospect of building a socialist party to lead the working class to take political power and to thereby transform capitalism into socialism. I thought I might read what I've found to be one of the most clarifying pieces of writing on this subject. It's an essay by a British Marxist named Monty Johnstone, published in 1967 in the Socialist Register, called Marx and Engels and the Concept of the Party. It's a really nice, clear exposition of just that, just what its title describes. And, I think Marx is often treated as this scientific economic thinker, and that's where his kind of significance is discovered in his understanding of the economic workings of capitalism or something along those lines. And what often falls out of the picture is that Marx's engagement with political economy was in service of his revolutionary political concerns. As Engels said by his graveside after discussing his contributions to economic science and to the science of history, Engels clarified that above all, Marx was a revolutionist, and that these concerns were motivated by the revolutionary implications of the engagement with this new understanding of history and of the economic structure of society. Ultimately, it was Marx's political concerns, specifically his concern to help the working class, the industrial working class, the modern proletariat, understand its historical mission, namely that it was destined to organize itself, to unite as a class, to take political power into its own hands, and thereby to realize the emancipatory potential that had developed within capitalism, and in a broader sense had been developing since the origin of civilization, since the origin of class society, but that had been unable to come to fruition until just that moment in history, beginning in the 19th century, when that potential was ripe and ready to be realized, if only humanity, and specifically the working class, realized that that potential was there and took it in hand and saw through its emergence, its realization, as a political task, as the task of leading the whole of society. And it was for this reason that Marx and Engels were dedicated to the task of organizing the working class into a political party on the basis of its consciousness of this historical task. And it was kind of in reading this task out of the engagement with bourgeois political economy that Marx saw the significance of engaging that material critically. But ultimately, it was in service of developing the consciousness of the working class through its organization into a political party. So I'm going to read Johnstone's text here, or it's not very long, but I think I'll probably break it up into a few short videos just to make it a little more digestible. The article is in 7 parts. So I think I'll probably read the first 2 parts today, and then I'll try to come back to the remainder of it soon. I don't know if I'll be able to tomorrow. We'll see. So, without further ado, Monty Johnstone's Marx and Engels and the Concept of the Party. Part 1. The concept of a proletarian party occupies a central position in the political thought and activity of Marx and Engels. Quote, "Against the collective power of the propertied classes," they argued, "the working class cannot act as a class, except by constituting itself into a political party, distinct from, and opposed to, all old parties, formed from the propertied classes." End quote. This was, quote, "indispensable in order to ensure the triumph of the social revolution, and its ultimate end, the abolition of classes." End quote. Yet nowhere do the authors of the Manifesto of the Communist Party set out in systematic form a theory of the proletarian party, its nature and its characteristics, any more than they do for social class or for the state, to both of which it is closely related. Moreover, within the broad general framework of their theory of class struggle and of revolution, they evolved their ideas on the forms and functions of proletarian parties as they went along, and related them to their analyses of often very different historical situations. They did not work out in advance any plan for the creation of a revolutionary proletarian party, to which their subsequent theoretical work was geared, and at no time did they themselves establish a political party. Having already by the beginning of 1844 come theoretically to see the proletariat as the leading force for social emancipation, they were to base themselves on existing organizations created by advanced sections of that class, and to condemn as sectarianism any attempt to impose preconceived organizational forms on the working class movement from outside. In the sphere of party building, Marx could have said, as Molière did of the plots of his plays, Je prends mon bien où je la trouve. Pardon my poor French. I believe that translates to something along the lines of, I take my good where I find it, or I take my property where I find it. Although members and leaders of party organizations for only a few years, Marx and Engels devoted a considerable amount of time, particularly in the latter parts of their lives, to giving advice on the programs and development of workers' parties in various countries, seeing themselves as occupying a, quote, "special status as representatives of international socialism," and of the general staff of the party, capital P. When we examine the totality of these party activities and views on parties spread over half a century, we are faced with a considerable variety and complexity, embodying at first sight a number of contradictions. Moreover, our difficulty is increased by the fact that during the lifetimes of Marx and Engels, the whole notion of a political party was to develop and change along with the forms of activity open to it. And as we shall see, they were to use the term in several different senses without defining them. It has therefore been quite possible to draw selectively on their activities, and above all their writings, in support of the most opposite versions of their views. An understanding of the ideas of Marx and Engels on proletarian parties is only possible if they are set in each case in their widely varying historical and semantic contexts. This I shall attempt to do by examining the major models of the party in their work, each of which corresponds to a stage or stages in the development of the working class movement in a given period or in given countries. These I take as A, the small international communist cadre organizations, the League of Communists, 1847 to 52. B, the party without an organization, party in quotations, during the ebb of the labor movement, 1850, the 1850s and early 1860s. C, the broad international federation of workers' organizations, the First International, 1864 to 72. D, the Marxist National Mass Party, German Social Democracy, in the 1870s, 80s, and early 90s. And E, the broad National Labour Party, Britain and America in the 1880s and early 1890s, based on the Chartist model. I have chosen to examine the views of Marx and Engels together, for they were in fundamental agreement on all the questions discussed here. And over an important period, in keeping with the division of labor agreed between them, Engels dealt on behalf of both of them with requests for political advice from all over the world, continuing and extending this work after Marx's death into the era of the Second International. That's the end of part one. And before I read part two, I just want to mention you can find this entire article and all of the references on Marxist.org if you just search for Monty Johnstone and the title Marx and Engels and the concept of the party. So, part two. Having found themselves in 1844 through 45 in agreement on some of the basic principles of Marxism, Marx and Engels were to embark on a lifetime collaboration involving both the further development of their theoretical ideas and the attempt to, quote, win over the European and, in the first place, the German proletariat. From the beginning of 1846, based in Brussels, they initiated the setting up of communist correspondence committees, notably in Belgium, Britain, France, and Germany. These were to concern themselves with the internal affairs of what Engels was later to call the Communist Party in the process of formation. Though in this period both he and Marx were speaking of the Communist Party and our party in the traditional sense of a société de pensée, a society of thought. However, with them it was seen as expressing the interests of a class rather than a political organization in anything approaching the modern sense. Among those who received the lithographed circulars and pamphlets issued from Brussels were the leaders of the League of the Just, which, formed in 1836, was a small international secret society consisting mainly of German artisans that in recent years had particularly concerned itself with setting up and working within workers' educational associations. This was the organization that Marx and Engels now entered on the invitation of its leaders, who indicated that they were convinced of the general correctness of their views and agreed to their stipulation that the old conspiratorial forms related to the organization's Blanquist past should be scrapped. At a congress in the summer of 1847, it was reorganized as the League of Communists, adopting new rules giving it official communist aims at a second congress at the end of the year. A new and thoroughly democratic constitution laid down that annual congresses were the legislative authority of the League and provided for the electivity, accountability, and revocability at any time by their electors of all leading committees. It was as a detailed theoretical and practical program of the League that Marx and Engels were commissioned to write their famous Manifesto of the Communist Party. The Communist League was an international association of workers in a number of Western European countries, in which Germans predominated and which paid special attention to Germany. Although, for ordinary peace times at least, it was seen by Marx and Engels as a pure propaganda society, it was forced by the conditions of the time to operate as a secret society during most of the 5 years of its existence. It had its origins, wrote Engels in 1892, in two independent currents. On the one hand, a pure workers' movement, and on the other, a theoretical movement, stemming from the disintegration of Hegelian philosophy, associated predominantly with Marx. The Communist Manifesto of 1848, Engels goes on, marks the fusion of both currents. In the manifesto are set out some of the basic ingredients of Marx's and Engels's conception of the party. It puts forward the communists' claim to leadership of the working class by virtue of their superior theoretical consciousness, which belongs to the essence of this conception. The previous year, in his polemic against Proudhon, Marx had described the socialists and communists as the theoreticians of the proletarian class. Now he and Engels present the communists as the theoretical vanguard of the class, which has no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole, and does not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. They were distinguished from the other working class parties only in that in national struggles they point out and bring to the forefront the common interests of the entire proletariat, independent of all nationality, and that in the various stages of the struggle against the bourgeoisie, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. They were, in their practice, the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others, whilst in their theory they had, over the great mass of the proletariat, the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement, which they conceived as the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority in the interests of the immense majority. When Marx and Engels speak in the manifesto of the organization of the proletarians into a class, and consequently into a political party, they clearly have in mind the English model which Marx had described in The Poverty of Philosophy the year before. Here he had shown how in their struggle, first in trade unions, and then also by constituting a large political party under the name of Chartists, the mass of workers had developed from an amorphous, fragmented, potential class en sich, or in itself, into a fully fledged national class für sich, or for itself, engaged of necessity in political struggle. At the primitive stage of development and organization of the working class on the continent at this time, with the Communist League as a tiny cadre organization of some 200 to 300 members spread throughout Western Europe, the manifesto indicated that the communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. In fact, at this time, there was only one workers' party organized on a national scale, the Chartists, and the British communists, Julian Harney and Ernest Jones, worked in it as leaders of its left wing. In other countries, the members of the League were to join such parties as the French Social Democrats of Ledru Rollin and Louis Blanc, which Marx described as a coalition between petty bourgeois and workers. In Germany, in the 1848 revolution, they joined the Democratic Party, the party of the petty bourgeoisie, whose most advanced wing they formed until the spring of 1849. Whilst the form of these tactics was dictated by the circumstances of the time, they do contain an element which is common to all their party models: the avoidance of sectarian isolation, the finding of fields of work where the communists can get the ear of the working class. It must be clear from the above that the Communist League, an international secret society comprising only a small core of militants, cannot be described as a political party even in the usual sense in which the term was most frequently used at the time, and is applied in the manifesto itself to the large national organizations in which the communists were to work. As the Soviet Marx scholar E.P. Kendall argues in one of the regrettably few books published on the League, Marx and Engels saw the League only as the germ, the nucleus of their party, notwithstanding the fact that they called its program the Manifesto of the Communist Party. The conditions of the time, he writes, did not provide possibilities for the League of Communists to turn into a real party. A glance at the League's role in the Revolution of 1848 to 49 will bear this out. Returning to Germany in the spring of 1848, after the start of the revolution, together with the bulk of League members who had been living abroad, Marx and Engels went to Cologne. After initially getting the League's Central Committee operating from there, they appear to have concentrated all their efforts from about the middle of May on the production of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. This famous radical daily paper, whose first number appeared on the 1st of June, campaigned under the editorship of Marx for a determined struggle to carry through to the end the democratic tasks in this bourgeois democratic revolution. Seeing the very great difficulties for the League in issuing directives to its dispersed supporters, Marx and Engels concluded that such directives were better disseminated through the press. In recent years, a bitter controversy has raged between Boris Nikolevsky and the old Menshevik who died in America in 1966, and E.P. Kendall around the alleged dissolution of the League in the summer of 1848. Whether in fact Marx used special discretionary powers bestowed on him at the beginning of the revolution to dissolve the League in June of 1848, as Nikolevsky alleges on the basis of the prison deposition of P.G. Roser, one of those sentenced at the Cologne trial of League leaders in 1852, or whether, as Kendall argues, the possibility of such a dissolution is contradicted by the high evaluation of the past role of the League throughout the whole period of 1847 to 52 given by Marx and Engels, who never in their accounts of the League's activity referred to such a dissolution, we shall probably never know for certain. Unless further research brings some new documents to light, we shall have to make up our minds on the balance of probabilities. There is, however, no dispute on the fact that, as Engels testified later, the few hundred League members vanished in the enormous mass that had been suddenly hurled into the movement. Kendall accepts that in the summer of 1848, the Cologne Central Committee ceased to function and was, in late August or September, he now thinks, dissolved and its powers transferred to the London District Committee. Further, Soviet historians accept as credible Roser's account of a meeting that he attended in the spring of 1849 between Marx and Joseph Moll, who had been sent by the new London Central Committee to reorganize the League in Germany. According to Roser, Marx declared that with the existing freedom of speech and of the press, the League was superfluous. A number of contemporary Marxist historians have unfortunately found it necessary to interpret these tactics in terms of a later Marxian and a fortiori Leninist concept of the party. They therefore argue that the editorial staff of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung was the political center of leadership of the proletarian party in Germany, of the Communist League, the true general staff of the proletarian party, to which now fell in practice the tasks of the Central Committee of the Communist League. In the accounts of the history of the League and the Neue Rheinische Zeitung that Marx and Engels wrote in the 1860s and 80s, there are no such anachronistic formulations to be found. Nor, for that matter, are there in Lenin, a keen student of the history of Marxism, who wrote in 1905, "It was only in April 1849, after the revolutionary newspaper had been published for almost a year, that Marx and Engels declared themselves in favor of a special workers' organization. Until then, they were merely running an organ of democracy, unconnected by any organizational ties with an independent workers' party. This fact, monstrous and incredible from our present-day standpoint, clearly shows us what an enormous difference there is between the German Workers' Party of those days and the present Russian Social Democratic Labor Party." That was Lenin. April 1849, as Lenin indicates in the passage quoted, was to see an important change in Marx's and Engels' revolutionary strategy. Marx and other communists issued a statement announcing their resignation from the Rhineland District Committee of the Democratic Associations, and urging a closer union of workers' associations, of which a national congress was planned. They appear to have concluded that the German workers had now developed sufficient political experience for it to be a practical proposition to work for a broad mass workers' party based on the workers' associations and independent of the petty bourgeois Democrats with their indecision, weakness, and cowardice. It was too late, however, for these plans to get off the ground. The outbreak of the insurrection in South and West Germany was to begin soon afterwards, and its defeat by mid-July signified the end of the German Revolution. Most of the old leaders of the League came together again in exile in London in the autumn of 1849, where the Central Committee was reconstituted and proceeded to reorganize the League in Germany, of necessity as a secret society. On the assumption that a new revolution is impending, Marx and Engels drew up their famous address of March 1850 on behalf of the League's Central Committee. It notes that in the 2 years of revolution, although the League's members as individuals had stood in the forefront of the struggle, the former firm organization of the League was considerably slackened. Whilst the Democratic Party had organized itself more and more in Germany, the Workers' Party, by which they here must mean either the labor movement as a whole or the general interest of the proletariat as a class, lost its only firm foothold, by which the Communist League is meant. The conclusion that is drawn as the leitmotif of the 11-page address is, an end must be put to this state of affairs. The independence of the workers must be restored, and they must not allow themselves to be drawn into a large opposition party embracing all shades of democratic opinion. The workers, and above all the League, they write, must exert themselves to establish an independent, secret and public organization of the Workers' Party. The League would clearly form the secret organization, and its branches should become the central point and nucleus of workers' associations, in which the attitude and interests of the proletariat will be discussed independently of bourgeois influences. These workers' associations, existing throughout Germany, and normally of a social, cultural, and educational character, would provide the broad mass basis and public organization of the Independent Workers' Party that was to be created. After the expected democratic revolution, the workers must contest elections to a national assembly with their own independent candidates, consisting as far as possible of members of the League. Eduard Bernstein started the fashion, now followed among others by Mr. George Lichtheim and Professor Bertram Wolff, of describing the March address as Blankist. Yet the concept of party and revolution is certainly very far away from being Blankist in the normally accepted sense of the term, though there are indeed points of convergence with Blanqui's tactics in 1848, which were in a number of ways untypical, and with the forms of struggle foreseen for the forthcoming revolution by the émigré Blanquists, with whom Marx and Engels concluded a short-lived agreement in 1850. What the address makes quite clear is that what it envisages is not a push carried out by a revolutionary elite, but the organizing of the most broadly based workers' party, which in the next revolution will march together with the petty bourgeois Democrats, whom it will help bring to power, and then push forward to make the maximum inroads into capitalist property. In the revolutionary excitement that the workers should keep alive as long as possible, they must attempt to organize themselves independently as a proletarian guard, with commanders and a general staff elected by themselves. It is significant, as Dr. Rudolf Schlesinger has noted, that the address, which was confidential, does not suggest that these detachments should be subordinated to communist control, but indicates rather that they should put themselves at the command of revolutionary community councils, which the workers will have established. The address recognizes that the German workers will need to go through a lengthy revolutionary development before themselves taking power, and stresses the need for their clarifying their minds as to what their class interests are, with the obvious implication that the League should function as a propaganda society. When in the late summer of 1850, Marx concluded that European capitalism had entered a period of prosperity, and there would be no new revolution in the period ahead, he was faced with opposition from an important section of League members headed by Willich and Schopper. Combating their voluntarism, he said that instead of studying the real conditions, they had made the will alone into the driving force of revolution. The League in London split on this issue, and the Central Committee was transferred back to Cologne, where it functioned for a while until its members were arrested and, in November 1852, sentenced by a Cologne court. Shortly afterwards, the League in London was dissolved on Marx's proposal, and its continuation on the continent declared no longer to be opportune. Let's see what time it is. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and also read section 3 because it's not terribly long, and I'm enjoying this. So hopefully some of you out there are as well. Part 3. After the split in the Communist League in the autumn of 1850, and even before its formal dissolution 2 years later, Marx and Engels had begun to withdraw into an authentic isolation, preferring the position of the independent writer to that of the so-called Revolutionary Party. The relief expressed by Marx to Engels on the 11th of February 1851, at the end of the system of mutual concessions, of inadequacies endured for the sake of appearances, was matched by Engels' joy 2 days later that from now on they were responsible to themselves alone. How do people like us, who flee official positions like the plague, fit into a party? He thunders. What good to us, who spit on popularity, is a party, i.e., a band of asses who swear by us because they take us for the likes of them? Strong words, but it would be wrong, as Franz Mehring says, to take the actual expressions used too seriously, and totally indefensible to divorce them from their actual context and argue, as Bertram Wolfe does, that they represent their real private opinions about the party to be contrasted with statements made by them 30 and 40 years later, some of which he quotes, which were written for the eyes of others. They reflect the frustrations of the first difficult period of exile after the defeat of the revolution and the recognition that no new one was impending. They represent their reaction to the petty squabbles of the emigration, from which they were withdrawing in order to return to their studies, interrupted since 1848, in the hope of gaining, above all in the sphere of political economy, a scientific victory for our party. What, however, was this party of which they continued to speak after the dissolution of the Communist League in 1852, in a period when, as Marx wrote to the poet Freiligrath in 1860, he never again belonged to any secret or public society, and considered that his theoretical works were of greater benefit to the working class than participation in associations whose days on the continent were over. What we have here is not a party in the normal sense that Engels was using when he indicated in December 1852 that no political party can exist without an organization, but rather in the first instance a return to the use of the term that we saw them make in the mid-40s to designate Marx and the small band broadly sharing his basic views, whom the Prussian police reports, as well as Marx's supporters in this period, refer to as the Marx Party. Already in March 1853, within 4 months of the dissolution of the League, Marx is writing to Engels, "We must definitely recruit our party afresh, since the few adherents that he names, despite their qualities, do not add up to a party." They aimed to get this group, our clique, as Engels calls them fairly jocularly in a letter to Wedemeyer in America in 1853, to prepare themselves by study for the revolutionary struggles that they were confident lay ahead. Marx was anxious to coordinate his public activities to coordinate the public activities of the members of this party embryo, as Wilhelm Liebknecht would later call it. When in 1859 LaSalle published a pamphlet on the Italian War of that year, expressing a point of view with which they disagreed, Marx wrote to Engels criticizing their wayward comrade's failure, first to apprise himself of their opinion. "We must insist on party discipline, or everything will land in the dirt," he added. Marx, however, also spoke of our party in a more transcendental sense, as when in 1860, in the letter to Freiligrath, from which I have already quoted, he counterposed to the party in the ephemeral sense, which, in the shape of the Communist League, had, he said, ceased to exist for me 8 years ago, the party in the great historical sense. The Communist League, like Blanqui's Société des Saisons, and hundreds of other societies, was only an episode in the history of the party, with a capital P, the party in the great historical sense, which is growing everywhere spontaneously from the soil of modern society. For Marx, the party in this sense was the embodiment of his conception of the mission of the working class, concentrating in itself the revolutionary interests of society, to accomplish the historical tasks which automatically arose from its general conditions of existence. It was in this sense, also, that Marx understood the term party when he reported to Engels in 1859 that he had told a deputation from an émigré German workers' group, "We had received our appointment as representatives of the proletarian party from nobody but ourselves. It was, however, endorsed by the exclusive and universal hatred consecrated to us by all the parties and fractions of the old world." Does this statement indicate a conception of charismatic election and strains of prophetism in Marx? Leaving aside the somewhat arrogant form in which the claim is made, and Marx could certainly be arrogant, especially when in these difficult years of poverty and ill health he was stung by the follies of some of his fellow exiles, there remains the idea of Marx and Engels seeing themselves, by virtue of their scientifically evolved theoretical understanding of the locum tenens for the German working class party, which for the moment enjoyed only a theoretical existence. This is, however, a temporary and exceptional conception for them, a special case in no way typical of the mainstream of their thought, which is found only at this early stage in the life of the still little developed German working class in the hiatus between the disappearance of the Communist League and the appearance of new working class organizations that they were confident would emerge to take its place. They were decidedly not trying to substitute themselves for such organizations, which at the time did not exist. After a real movement came once more into existence in the 1860s, they never again saw themselves as self-appointed representatives of the proletarian party. On the contrary, wherever a real working class movement existed and struggled against the existing order, even when it was led by people with whom they had strong theoretical differences, they identified themselves with it and saw it as a manifestation of the party in the great historical sense. Thus, Marx was to tell Kugelmann that the Paris Commune was the most glorious deed of our party, capital P, since the June insurrection in Paris, in much the same way that Engels was to refer to the Commune as, without any doubt, the child of the International intellectually, although the June insurrection in Paris, Thus Marx was to tell Kugelmann that the Paris Commune was the most glorious deed of our party since the June insurrection in Paris. I'm confused here. I think I need to finish up soon. Luckily, I'm almost finished with this section. In much the same way that Engels was to refer to the Commune as, without any doubt, the child of the International intellectually, although the International did not lift a finger to produce it. In 1892, writing for French socialists on the movement in Germany, Engels stressed that he was speaking only in my own name, in no wise in the name of the German party. Only the selected committees and delegates of this party have the right to do that. It is perhaps worth noting that, although in the 50s he saw no basis for an organized workers' party in Germany, he was in 1857 urging that in Britain, the Chartist leader Ernest Jones should form a party, for which he must go to the factory districts. What he had in mind was a recruiting campaign by the National Charter Association in the industrial areas, drawing on the old Chartist traditions, to develop itself into a broadly based working class party in which a leading role would be played by Jones himself, whom Engels was to describe on his death in 1869 as the only educated Englishman who was at bottom entirely on our side. Thus, even in their years in the wilderness, Marx and Engels retained and sought to realize where possible their basic concept of the party as an organization in which socialist theory fuses with the labor movement. Okay, and I'll leave it there for today. I will try to get to the remaining three sections, or four sections, tomorrow or within the next few days. Free time pending. So thanks for watching.